that destiny was meant to be continental. And indeed, some people thought hemispheric. There are people around Polk who believe that it is God's intent for the United States to cover both North and South America. Well, Polk was content simply to extend American sovereignty to the Pacific coast. There was a problem. Most of it was owned by Mexico. In fact, here's a factoid to impress your friends with. In 1846, Mexico was as large as the United States. For a very simple reason. Because much of what is today the United States was then Mexico. And by that I mean not only Texas and New Mexico and Arizona, but also California, parts of Utah, Colorado. There was no real border to speak of. It was vaguely defined. But the fact remains that Mexico territorially was the equal of the United States. In any event, when Polk became president, he made it very clear he wanted Texas, he wanted California, he also wanted Oregon, which the British were contesting. He tried to bully Mexico into selling California for $25 million. There were those who would like to sell it back for $25 million. But that's the Reagan Library, I'm sorry. That's another one. Anyway, the Mexicans weren't selling. One thing led to another, and basically, to boil it down, Polk claimed that American territory, i.e. Texas, went as far south as the Rio Grande River. The Mexicans disputed that. When Polk sent an army to the Rio Grande River, which remember to the Mexicans is Mexico, and they got into a clash, Polk announces, this is a cause for war. The Mexicans have committed aggression against the United States. Guess who opposed him in this? Anti-slavery forces opposed him, first of all, because many of them believed that the whole idea of the Mexican War was this was a grab for more territory for the expansion of slavery. These, remember, are the same people who want Cuba because it can be a slave state, who want California and New Mexico because they believe they can be slave states, who in fact want all of Mexico because they believe it can be slave states. A young congressman, single-term congressman, unpopular congressman, because he opposed the Mexican War, from Springfield, Illinois, named Abraham Lincoln, introduced what he called the Spot Resolution. It was very simple. It said, Mr. President, would you please identify on a map of your choosing the exact point at which Mexico committed aggression against the United States? Very clever, too clever by half. Needless to say, Congress didn't pass the Spot Resolution, but it got Lincoln in trouble. His hometown newspaper likened him to Benedict Arnold. And he got into a debate which sounds suspiciously modern. A debate basically over, will you support the troops? And Lincoln said, yes, I will support the troops. He voted for supplies and weapons and pay for the troops in the field, but that didn't prevent him from saying the following about the President of the United States. As to the mode of terminating the war and securing peace, the President is equally wandering and indefinite. First, it is to be done by a more vigorous prosecution of the war in the vital parts of the enemy's country. And after apparently talking himself tired on this point, the President drops down into a half-despairing tone and tells us that with a people distracted and divided by factions, and a government subject to constant changes by successive revolutions, the continued success of our arms may fail to secure a satisfactory peace. But soon he falls into doubt of this too, and then drops back on the already half-abandoned ground of more vigorous prosecution. All this shows that the President is in no way satisfied with his own positions. First, he takes up one, and in attempting to argue us into it, he argues himself out of it. then seizes another and goes through the same process. His mind, tasked beyond its power, is running hither and thither like some tortured creature on a burning surface, finding no position on which it can settle down and be at ease. Well, tough words. In 1847, words that would come back to haunt a wartime president named Abraham Lincoln just a generation later. Put yourself in the high-button shoes of William McKinley on the eve of the 20th century. McKinley, unlike Polk, was very reluctant to get into a war. He had been a major in the Civil War, and he said, I remember war, I remember the horror of war, there's no glory to war, there won't be a war as long as I can prevent it. And we all like to think that American presidents are the most powerful men on the planet. Well, guess what? When the Maine blew up, a U.S. battleship in Havana Harbor in February of 1898, there was no power on earth that could keep the United States from going to war. According to the Speaker of the House, a man named Thomas Reed, McKinley might just as well stand out in the middle of a Kansas waste and dissuade a cyclone. The cyclone was not natural but man-made, a lethal whirlwind of Spanish pride, congressional belligerence, Wall Street avarice, and oceans of ink spilled by the yellow press of William Randolph Hearst and other journalistic lords who believed that they, and not a mere president, spoke for the American people. Guess what? We didn't invent the modern media. We didn't invent the powerful media who in many ways define the national agenda and to whom presidents respond more than anything else. That's been going on for 100 years or more. The ensuing conflict over Cuba and the Philippines, remember, these were Spanish territories. The Spanish Empire was tottering by the end of the 19th century. McKinley was pushing on an open door. Not surprisingly, the war was over in 3 months, or so he thought. He showed himself to be a capable strategist. He operated out of the first White House war room, complete with a switchboard whose 20 telegraph wires gave the president instant access to generals in the field and diplomats around the globe. Yet the fruits of victory can contain the seeds of later bloodshed. It turned out to be much easier to eject the Spaniards from Cuba and the Philippines than it was for us to know what our relationship was to be with these newly liberated domains. The fact is, we had liberated the Philippines and Cuba, but we weren't entirely willing to let them go. Cuba was a special case. Congress passed legislation, and McKinley signed it, that basically said, as soon as the war is over in Cuba, we'll liberate Cuba. The Philippines, on the other hand, became a bone in his throat. There were people like Mark Twain, Andrew Carnegie, Jane Addams, the great social reform in Chicago. They formed what they called the Anti-Imperialist League. They did not want the United States to get into the empire business. They thought that the moment we did that, it would transform the kind of nation that we were. And whether you think it's a good idea in retrospect or not, it's hard to deny the accuracy of their prophecy. This left McKinley on the horns of a dilemma. Being McKinley, he didn't commission a poll, he said a prayer. In fact, this is how he put it to a visiting group of clergymen. The truth is, I didn't want the Philippines, and when they came to us as a gift from the gods, I did not know what to do with them. I sought counsel from all sides, Democrats as well as Republicans, but got little help. I thought first we would take only Manila, then Luzon, then other islands perhaps also. I walked the floor of the White House night after night until midnight, and I am not ashamed to tell you, gentlemen, that I went down on my knees and prayed Almighty God for light and guidance more than one night.